Hello everyone, I'm Sahid. Thank you for clicking this video. I'm very happy that you're here. Today I'll be continuing my chapter series on Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh. And today I'll be reading part 2, chapter 7. If you watched my last video, we discussed about chapter 6, and in my other videos, I had part 2, chapter 4, chapter 5, and then part 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Please kindly, before you watch today's video, please visit those previous chapter videos as they give you a bit more idea of sort of how we got to the point that we're in this book, and a bit more instinct about sort of the characters in this book and sort of where we are so far within this really interesting book that I've been just enjoying as I've been reading it so far. Yeah, and so today, before I do my chapter reading of chapter 7, like my other videos, I like to give a brief sort of intro / summary or introduction, sort of what I've read so far, particularly some of the other chapters I read, but mostly based on the last chapter I read, just to sort of give a recap. So chapter 6 of part 2, we sort of explored Obifuna sort of experience at boarding school. So in the previous chapter, we learned that Obifuna had to now go to boarding school due to an occasion that happened in his household. This occasion, if you watch my other videos, is between the main character and a boy, another character named a boy who is living or was living in their household, and they had sort of this intimate moment in which the father of the main character, Obifuna, caught them having that moment, and so he therefore sends his son to boarding school in a way to, I guess, remove him from having that sort of lifestyle or sort of things that he was doing in their house. I guess a chance for him to how do I say this? Sort of do better things with his life and or do more conventional things. He believes, or his father possibly has this idea that going to boarding school would change him in some way. I was going to use the word reinvent, but I was like, I don't know if that sounds right. But anyways, so now in chapter 6 in particular, we sort of explore Obifuna's experience in boarding school, which has not been great. We see from the other chapters that he just truly hates it. He hates, the new space and environment he's in. This is something he's never done. He's never been to boarding school. The people, he hates them. He hates having to deal with the seniors, who are just basically cruel, evil bullies. And he hates the food, just a different overall experience, and he just hates the fact that he's not home. He feels like it's sort of like he's in a prison. He feels as though it's a prison. But particularly in chapter 6, they have something called visiting day in their boarding school, and on visiting day, close family relatives come to visit their students at the school. But unfortunately, Obifuna's parents weren't able to visit. And prior to this, he was bragging to, some of the people he made, he has two important people I think I should mention, Wisdom and Jeku, who are, students in the same boarding school, and he's come to be close to them. They've helped him sort of navigate this new experience for him, and they've been really crucial and a key part of his journey in boarding school. But anyways, he's sort of like, sort of bragging to his friends, telling like how his mom is a really good cook. But then, he gets or when he calls his parents to see if they're coming, his father is like, sorry, Obifuna, we're not coming, or he says like we're too busy or something. And this just ultimately breaks Obifuna's heart. He was looking forward to his parents coming, and now he has to sort of deal with the fact that all this bragging that he has done, and then hoping that he would see this boy that he had an intimate moment with in his house before he was sent to boarding school. He would see him. at first when he gets that call, he's sort of sad that no, I won't see my mom, you know, a boy, because these are two people that he truly cares about, and he was looking forward to seeing them. His dad, on the end, maybe not really, because obviously his dad sent him to boarding school and did this because of his identity and the characteristics of him obviously being queer and having attractions to a boy. So this, obviously wouldn't interest him, but he was looking forward to seeing a boy and his mom the most, because obviously his mom was there for him when his father would sort of, abuse him and sort of mistreat him for his identity. And so he was really looking forward to seeing those two important people in his lives. So that call broke his heart. But later on, we also have sort of this moment when he was walking back to his dorm, and this sort of senior, his name is Senior Papilo. He's like a popular and this athletic, but also sort of really mean senior who most people talk about very often. And he accidentally stepped on this guy's, feet or something when he was walking. And due to this, he had to apologize. And after apologizing, senior sort of like, you have to repay me on visiting day. And obviously his parents aren't coming, so he tells him that my parents are not coming, I cannot repay you for anything. But then the senior surprisingly said, don't worry, like, it's fine, I have something for you. And then he later sort of goes, the day comes, and surprisingly he gets like this, this one junior comes to knock on his dormitory and tells him that there's somebody, visiting him, because that's what they do on visiting day. When parents come, they let the students know, and then they go to see their parents. But, a boy wasn't expecting his parents, so he didn't know that anybody would be coming for him. And so he thought it was a prank at first. And so, he later went, and then he noticed that a boy comes to visit him. And so when a boy comes, he's surprised, but he's very glad, because it's somebody he was looking forward to seeing, and he didn't expect to see him at all today, particularly because his parents told him that they're not coming. But the thing is that a boy was kicked out from the house, because his dad, Obifuna's dad accused him for stealing, which we read about, I believe, in chapter 5. But obviously it's not, because he's a boy, from other chapters that we've read, is somebody that, was literally praised by his father, Obifuna's father, Ngozi. And Ngozi just accusing him of stealing was something that, even his mom, Uzamaka, Obifuna's mom, couldn't believe, because obviously Anozi constantly praised him to his wife Uzamaka, and so hearing this, like, deep part of her knew that he couldn't have done that. And the truth is that, and that's not the reason. We all know the particular reason for this decision was because of that intimate moment that he caught his son, and obviously a boy having in the kitchen that one day was the reason he sent Obifuna to boarding school. And I strongly believe it's the reason he also chose to kick a boy out. And so, when a boy comes to visit Obifuna unexpectedly, they speak, they have this little moment, and a boy sort of explains everything to him, and he's sort of speechless. But he later sort of is like, asking him how he's doing. A boy also checks him how he's doing. They have a little intimate moment, and they sort of end up saying their goodbyes. And then after that scene, the next day, we have this moment with Obifuna remembering that he didn't end up going to see Papilo, who sort of told him to come to his room on visiting day, because Obifuna told him that he didn't have his parents coming, which he didn't, and he didn't know a boy was going to come see him. And then later, when he goes, Saint Papilo sort of upset, and he sort of basically beats Obifuna for supposedly lying to him, and he's a senior, so this is what sort of seniors do in this boarding school, which is why one of the reasons that Obifuna truly hates this new sort of school system that he's in. He hates it deeply, and it's one of the reasons because of the way the seniors treat these underclassmen students. But yeah, and so he I guess Senior Papilo saw him with a boy that day, and so he sort of, aren't you the one I saw at with a man that the day of visiting day? And so he a boy is sort of like yes, that was me, but I didn't know, and sort of trying to explain to him, but he didn't believe him. And so he does all these things. He made him sort of lie down in a dirty floor. He beats him with his belt. It was just really sad reading that part. But in the end, later on, a boy sort of later becomes close to him because Senior Papilo sort of came to his dorm this one time and gave him food, and then he goes back to give the plate that of the food that he was given. And then when he went back, Senior Papilo sort of like was gymming at that time, and so they have this little weird moment in which Obifuna was sort of like on his knees. Basically, at some point he sort of started apologizing, which this is something that's common in boarding school. Seniors sort of make the people that they beat, or the underclassmen, like the juniors that they beat, feel sort of guilty, even though they didn't really. Sometimes they didn't really truly do anything wrong, and so he basically end up being in submission to him, and filling up Senior Papilo's ego, which was just unfortunate to read about. But then later on, we see that a boy, Obifuna, ended up being sort of Senior Papilo's boy, and he sort of gets benefit for this because the other seniors bully him less. And then they have moments in which Senior Papilo gives him the food, the good food that the seniors get, and he has these things, but he still sort of gets some slight mistreatment sometimes. So he has his pros and cons, but most of it were benefits that Obifuna felt good about. And Senior Papilo is a senior, and he was graduating, and towards the end of chapter 6, he sort of asks him, "Are you gonna miss him?" Senior Papilo sort of asks Obifuna if he's going to miss him, and Obifuna is sort of like, yes. So yeah, he's first like sort of choked because he was eating something. They were eating together at that moment, but sort of ends up telling him like, yes, and then so that's how chapter 6 ended. But yeah, I wanted to keep it as short as possible because I sometimes or not exactly, I don't like that term, but I sort of say things, say a lot of things without realizing that I'm just going on and on, but this book has been so interesting for me to read, and sort of sitting here and sort of thinking about what I read, even though it was like a few days ago, really makes me see that I'm really enjoying this book, and being able to remember the things that I read is so important. But yeah, I'm going to continue my chapter series, or the chapter series we're reading together, right, on Blessings by Chukwuebuka, and today we'll be reading part 2, chapter 7. So excited. Okay. Part 2, chapter 7. After he emerged from the bliss of babyhood, Obifuna picked up several undesirable traits, among which was his susceptibility to illness. A sickness would seem to sprout of the blue, torturing his tiny body and raising Uzoamaka's blood pressure until something appeared to snap, and it disappeared almost as swiftly as it had come. A few days past his 5th birthday, he developed a fever. It was beyond comprehension. She had woken up the night before to the sound of someone heavily mounting the stairs, a steady thud that lasted well past half an hour, neither approaching nor receding. When Ngozi took out a lamp to investigate, he assured her that there was no one, that the security gate at the base of the stairs was still firmly locked. He shot her one of his accusing stares that said it had all been in her head, and because the boys were asleep in their room, and the sound of the thud stopped after she returned to bed, she did not argue with him. But the next day, Obifuna had not risen well. He lay stretched out of the bed, burning with a fever that threatened to scald the back of Uzumaka's palm, his body so still that the slow rise and fall of his stomach gave the only indication he was still alive. His breathing was labored and heavy, the occasional sound from his slightly opened lips sounding to her like the groans of a dying man. He was placed on a trip by the doctor for a few days, and she kept vigil by his side for the duration, dosing him in capfuls of olive oil, forcing mashed meals and tablets she had procured at the pharmacy down his throat, terrified of taking her eyes off him and knowing with a stubborn certitude that they would have to take her before they harmed a hair on his head. On the 5th day, he began to kick in his eyes, mumbling something she did not understand. She crouched beside him, afraid to touch him and afraid to move away, begging him in between sobs not to lose the fight. His kicking slowed after a while, and he returned his hands to his sides, fists rigidly clenched. She held a light to his face, and although his lids were open, eyeballs squarely meeting hers, there was a deadness to them that told her he was far gone. She knelt beside him and held his hand in both of hers, her head pressed to them, and it was in that position that he found her the next morning, staring with wide-eyed puzzlement as she ran her hands all over him, unbelieving, the boy who had nearly died before her own eyes. Uzumaka had always felt that she alone understood him. She had first begun to reward him with renewed interest when, at a crusade she attended with Obifuna, while pregnant with Ekene, the prophetess, a towering giant of a woman with a deep masculine voice, had paused by Uzumaka's seat as she walked down the pew. In the course of her preaching, she lifted Obifuna, barely a year old then, fast asleep, from Uzumaka's thigh and cradled him in her arms as she walked the short length of the row, all the while speaking in tongues, returning him to her afterwards without a word. Ngozi had dismissed the incident as irrelevant. So a female pastor sees you, an obviously pregnant woman, carrying a child and decides to relieve you of the burden for a few minutes. Big deal. But a second incident had humbled him. A few years down the line, Ngozi ran into debt from gambling, and the fiercely eyed, bad-tempered Udoaka, from whom he had borrowed, swore to make their lives miserable if Ngozi did not hand over the money he owed. Udoka turned up without warning at the shop and at their house, once even at Uzumaka's salon, threatening to involve the police, his village oracle, cultist. One evening, as they were having dinner, they heard a banging on the front door, the weight of the fist causing the table to vibrate, and Udoka's voice boomed from outside, demanding to see Ngozi, threatening to break down the door if he was delayed. Uzumaka hurried Ngozi to the bedroom and hid him in her box of wrappers, intending to tell the man he was not in, but before she could get her story in order, Obifuna, then 4 years old, had trotted to the door and opened it for the man. Uzumaka's first thought, after recovering from the shock of the sound of the door opening, was that the man would take Obifuna or Ekene as collateral until his money was returned. But when she hurried into the living room, she was left stunned by the sight before her. There was Obifuna, small with spindly legs, holding on to the door frame and looking up at the large, thick-set man before him with a defiance even Anozi lacked. The man stared down at Obifuna, dumbstruck, his fists suspended in mid-air, and then, still silent, Uduka turned and left. Obifuna closed the door after him and walked past Uzamaka to the dining table, hoisted himself onto the chair, and quietly continued with his interrupted dinner. When she told Anozi later, he turned and looked at Obifuna, who had fallen asleep on a chair in the living room in the middle of watching cartoon with Ekene, and she saw in Anozi's eyes not quite belief, but something close to wonder. It had always been easy when he was a child to get Obifuna to talk to her. His soft-voiced innocence had often been just what she needed to get through a hard day. She loved the evenings when she walked home with her sons after finishing work, a boy flanking her on each side. Obifuna would go on and on about the things that had happened at school, reliving the events with friend-sized gesticulation, as if eager to transport her into the actual moment, his gusto bringing a smile to her lips even on the worst days. During the years when they were growing up, as she became more and more despondent because of Ekene's rascality, Anozi's flagrant show of preference, and her own inability to keep a third pregnancy, the little fleeting moments like these were what somehow kept her going. Once, after a particularly grueling day at work, she had been exhausted and dispirited. The cackling of the plates at dinner and Anozi's aloofness compounding her crankiness. And then, without warning, Obifuna said in his childish voice, "Mommy, sorry," much to everyone's surprise, and that was all it took to make her lean forward at the table and burst into tears. She thought back now increasingly to his childhood. She remembered arriving home with him from hospital, Anozi mounting the stairs ahead of them to hold the door open for her. Visitors had poured in, and in such large numbers that there wasn't space to seat them all. For the first month, she was hardly alone with him, and when she searched across the room, she was likely to find him in the arms of someone else. There were times when it felt exhausting, when she wished her situation otherwise, but she was convinced, even then, that their mere presence solidified what she believed, that her boy was not like any other. As she watched him grow, putting away the baby clothes that so quickly became obsolete, marching with him to kindergarten on that first day, she had laid out in her mind, without even being consciously aware of it, a life course that he would follow, the excellent grades he would receive in school, the top-rated universities he would attend, the high-paying job he would have. She had pictured the beautiful girl he would settle with, the small children who looked like him running around her home and getting on her nerves, while she complained fondly to friends, all of them aware she would not have it another way. Uzoamaka watched Anozi eat. He ate with deliberate slowness, mouthing his gari with an almost showy precision before dipping it into his soup. He had a habit of chewing with his mouth open. It was the one reason why he never ate outside, lest he rile everyone with the sight and the grating sound of his chewing. She had become accustomed to quietly checking him when the sound became unbearable, but she held back today, steeling herself for what was to come. He washed his hands in the bowl of water before him at the end of the meal and rose from the dining table to head to the living room, getting set for the evening news. "I'm going to see Obifuna tomorrow," Uzoamaka announced. Ngozi turned round. "Uzoamaka, I just want to be sure he's fine," she said. "You talked to him on the phone the other day. He told you he's doing well," Ngozi said. "I need to see for myself." "This unreasonable behavior is exactly why the boy is where he is," Ngozi said. "You can see him when he comes home for the holidays," he decided, waving one dismissive hand at her and turning away to signal an end to the conversation. "Ngozi," Uzoamaka began. "Are you not listening to me?" he barked, turning back round. "I said you're not setting a foot outside this house to see anybody." Uzoamaka bit back a scoff. She stacked the dinner plates atop each other and took them to the kitchen. When she returned to the living room, Ngozi was reclining on a chair, watching the news. She stood by the room divider with her arms folded across her chest. "Ngozi, we have been married a long time. You know by now that I'm going to see him tomorrow, whether you like it or not." He blinked, taken aback. "Really? He has got to this now?" She eased away from the room divider without responding and walked to the bedroom. She could hear the water running down the hall. Ekene was having his nighttime shower. She climbed into bed and pulled the sheets to her chest. "I just told you that the school will go on break in less than a month," Ngozi called out suddenly from the living room. "What is so urgent that cannot wait until then?" The school was bigger than she had imagined. Uzoamaka sat by the chapel, staring at the vast fields of the school compound and marveling at the contrast between the green expanses of the institution and its urban location. Harmattan had come early this year, and she wished, as she stared at the gleaming white walls of the chapel, coated now with a thin film of dust, that she had come with a shower to protect her shoulders from the cold, dry wind. She recalled with retrospective amusement the earlier spectacle at the gate with the obstinate gateman who had refused to let her through, citing lack of purpose, as if her simple explanation of wanting to see her son was insufficient. She had banged repeatedly on the gate until the man was forced to summon his superior, and the older, wiser-looking man had only to give her a single look, taking note of the unwavering resolve in her eyes, before he held the gate wide open for her, with an appeal to at least wait until break time in half an hour. Obifuna took so long to emerge that Uzoamaka experienced a moment of dizzying panic, convinced that he was not there and that Ngozi had done something terrible with her son. And then there he was before her, a confused smile on his face, a mass of hair on his head she would have leveled had he been at home. Did his uniform look oversized on him, or had it always been that way? She hugged him twice, burying her nose in his hair. There was no lingering fragrance of the strawberry hair lotion he used at home. He did not hug her back as tightly as he usually did. Mwah! Uzoamaka ran her hands over his face. He usually knew better than not to be properly moisturized in Hamatan season. She could spot newly formed acne on his forehead, dark sprouts of hair forming on his upper lip. When he called her Mommy, she almost reflexively took a step backwards. It had been only 3 months. Her boy had transcended into manhood behind her back. You look nice, he said. Uzamaka smiled. It was an odd compliment from him, or perhaps it was a lack of enthusiasm with which it was given, stripping it of a genuine quality. She had taken the time to select her clothes for the day and applied a spicy perfume she reserved for special occasions. She wished he would not simply refer to her appearance as nice. What's this on your face? She asked when they were seated, pointing to the left side of his face, where a faint mark ran from his jaw up to the top of his ear. I fell down, Mommy, he said. Uzamaka drew back to look at him. It looked nothing like a wound from a fall. But what struck her the most was the memory of his using those exact words to describe bruises he had received on playgrounds as a child, bruises she later came to know were inflicted by other children. Yet again, her son was being bullied. Ngozi had pulled him out of a perfectly good school and brought him to a slaughterhouse. I'm fine, Mommy, he said, as if reading her mind. I mean it. Uzamaka sighed, putting off the battle until later. Have you made any friends? He nodded. A few. Uzamaka did not know whether to believe him. She could not claim to know about the idiosyncrasies of 16-year-old boys, but surely bringing his friends along to meet his mother was not considered old-fashioned now. Your friends, she said. Are they good to you? He glanced at her with her eyebrows raised, not knowing what to make of her question. She did not like this new haughty air he put on. She might have pulled his ears in warning if they had been at home. She tried again, leaning forward. Obiajulu, do you like it here? She asked. He shrugged. The teachers are good. It was not in his character to be deliberately evasive. She reached a hand under his chin and tilted his head upwards to have a good view of his face. He was unresisting, his neck darting in every direction she maneuvered, as if held by a spring, compliant in a sense but also defeated. Uzamaka felt an almost physical pain from her heart sinking. You can also come home if you are unhappy here, Uzamaka said. You know that, don't you? He hesitated before he nodded. Uzamaka looked away. She wished she sounded more convincing. She wished she believed herself. The silence between them was suddenly filled by voices of children playing. In the distance, a faint bell chimed briefly. What is it? Uzamaka asked. Heard that, whatever it was, it it seemed to have captured his attention in a way that she had been unable to all the while. "The warning bell for end of break time, Mommy," he said, "and visiting." Uzumaka nodded. She felt a slow numbness spread through her, but she rose as he did and passed the bag of provisions she had brought with her to him. They hugged a moment too brief, and then they disengaged. "Greet everyone," he said, half turning to go. Uzumaka nodded again, and then, just as the lie came to her tongue, because it had nestled stubbornly in her mind and refused to dissipate, "A boy was asking of you." Few things would stick more firmly in Uzumaka's memory than the look of Obifuna's face as he turned round to acknowledge her message. The joy so mesmerizingly captured in a lift of his brows, the instant spark in his eyes that she had been unable to elicit. She was reminded of stepping into his daycare center when he was a baby, after they had spent several hours apart. His squeal of delighted anticipation on hearing her voice from outside the room, the pure, innocent joy on his face when his eyes processed her form, as if she were the most precious person in the world. It was one of the babyish appealing traits he had lost in teenagehood, but there it finally was again after so long. Although brief, although now self-conscious, Uzumaka was only too familiar with this look, and although it was directed at someone who was not her, she knew that her boy was in love. And that is the end of part 2, chapter 7. Okay, let's talk about it. So chapter 7 of part 2 essentially starts off with us sort of going back to early Obifuna's childhood. And in chapter 7 we sort of explore how, there was a time when Obifuna, when he was around 5 years old, he had a really bad fever that scared Uzumaka deeply as his mother. And at the hospital, she was like on her knees praying, and the next day she sort of wakes up to seeing her in the same position as the previous night. And there was another occasion in which, when they were at the church, and she was pregnant with her second son, Ekene, sort of a pastor who was at the church sort of carries Obifuna when he was still very young, and sort of walked down the row with the boy, and this was very special to her. And then there was another occasion in which Obifuna, when one of the people that Ngozi, his father, owed money, Uduka, came to their house. Obifuna opens the door, and after the man saw him, he basically left them alone and leaves the house. And this was something that Uzumaka found also special, and she sort of informs her husband about. And Anozi wasn't exactly he didn't exactly see it as special, but he wondered a bit on how he was able to sort of get this obviously frustrated and really upset man to leave their house. He came to obviously find Uzumaki to pursue him, or sort of chase him to get his money back after he used it to gamble. But when he sees this little boy Obifuna at the door, he looks at him dumb, struck, and sort of just leaves. So Uzumaki for a long time feels that though she was the only one who truly understood him, and he was always her special baby. And then later on, we have a scene in which Uzumaki sort of tells her husband Ngozi that she was going to go see her son Obifuna at his boarding school, but Ngozi is sort of trying to prevent her from going to go see her son at the boarding school, and sort of telling him that they're not currently on break, and then she recently just spoke to her son on the phone and he told them that he was doing fine. But she's like, she wants to go see him, obviously because she, as his mother, misses him a lot. And due to the fact that she wasn't able to visit him on visiting day, she felt it was important to go see him to check on his well-being. And we see that they get into an argument, sort of, as Anozi continues to try to prevent her from going to see him. And Uzumaki sort of is going against that, and she tells him that we've been married for so long, and lets him know clearly that whether he likes it or not, she was still going to go see her son. And she does end up going to go see Obifuna the next day. And when she gets there, she deals with certain rude people, like the gate man who wasn't letting her see him, particularly because obviously they were in having like a special day or something, like a visiting day, or so he just felt that there wasn't a reason for her to come. But due to the fact that Uzumaki have not seen her son in such a long time, she felt it was important to go see Obifuna. But another older man sort of tells her that, opens the gate for her, and also tells her that she would have to wait until break time for Obifuna to see her. And she ends up waiting, and then Obifuna, sees his mom, and she has all these different thoughts of sort of just, first of all, his appearance. He has more hair, something that she, if he was living at home, he wouldn't have as much hair as that. She would have cut it shorter for him, or at her salon or something. But he looks I guess older as well. He has sort of like a mustache on his upper lip, and all these things are different in his appearance. And we also sort of explore sort of the relationship between his mother and himself during the visit. We notice that things are slightly much different in a way, and I think what plays a role in sort of the slight difference in the way he was acting towards her is maybe the fear that she probably already knows what's going on, or the reason why he was sent to boarding school from his father. And then also he's also probably worried of how she is sort of thinking about his lifestyle at the boarding school, and worried that she feels like he made a bad decision to also want to go to the boarding school after his dad suggested that to his mom. And she sort of asks him you can still come back home if you would like. And she asks him about, his experience in the school and if he has friends, and he's sort of just answering these questions very vaguely. He says the teachers are good, and so just having really reserved and short slash small talks. But he, compliments her, saying that she looks nice, but this is something that she felt as though he wouldn't usually say was an unusual compliment. It was either just say more or just don't say anything. So it was an unusual compliment. And then we also see in chapter 7 that, Uzumaka sort of tells her son that, a boy who is somebody I've talked about previously on this channel and on my previous chapter videos about his relationship with Obifuna, and she tells him that a boy said he hopes he's doing well, and this sort of enlightens him and made him really joyful, and she in her mind was sort of amused by the fact that through the little visit that she was having with him, he didn't seem as joyful. But when she did mention that, his face sort of enlightened up slash brightened up due to her saying that his brows were raised, and she noticed in that moment something that she didn't realize prior to seeing his sort of reaction to what she said. And then ultimately, from that moment, she knew that he was in love. And that's sort of how chapter 7 is concluded. And I hope to see more in the next chapter regarding sort of how she feels about what she now, believes in her mind. And it's really interesting seeing that she sort of just realized that. But as I read this book, I'm looking forward to sort of just exploring how his mother particularly will now sort of view her son, and how the different characters' relationships are going to change as I continue to read this book and be immersed into the different chapters and the different characters within this book. But yeah, that's sort of my recap on what I read today from chapter 7, part 2. Thank you for watching this video. Please kindly, if you enjoyed this video, please kindly subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you. Bye. I felt